Mary-Helen, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Mike. How are you?
Oh, you got fire. I love when we start with fire. Is that natural for you?
Absolutely. I don't know how to be any other way, honestly. It's this or asleep.
Okay, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while because there's two things that I'm really interested that you've been studying for a long time. One
Okay.
is the environment and the conditions that help people learn, and the
Yeah.
methodologies that create a gripping sensation from a brain and a psychological perspective where people are able to really wrestle and be pulled in to a learning mechanism to help them, set them up for later expression of those learnings. So that's
Yeah.
one. And the second is the unique methodologies that you've come to understand that are agnostic to the school environment, but
Hmm.
carry into just teaching in general. So one
Hmm.
is like the school and environmental conditions there, and the other is for teaching in general. So can I start with a really hard question?
Of course. Lay it on me.
Okay.
I won't promise to answer, but I'll do my best.
Okay. All right. So I'll set it up. Um, when I was younger, when I was in high school and all of this, the ages before that, like I didn't learn right. Maybe it was me, maybe it was the environment. It was certainly the interaction of the two, but it was not looking back, what I hoped for my son. So here's the question. What is wrong with the way that we are educating our kids, and how did we get here?
I'm really glad you didn't say what's wrong with me. Oh God, it's not you. It's the world, right? It's the way we set up education. So when you say you weren't learning right, you mean at school? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither. Welcome to my exclusive, not so exclusive club of people who just didn't get elementary, middle, and high school that well. I mean, um, you know, we really misunderstand in our modern schooling system, I think, the main aim of schooling in the current modern world, which is actually not learning, it's development. Wait, let me explain what I mean by that before somebody runs out and goes like Mary-Helen Immordino-Yang says, school's not about learning. I mean, learning happens, but learning is serving a bigger aim. And that's always the case. Why are you learning these things? How is the experience of learning this, whatever it is, changing what you're capable of thinking like and being like into the future? How is it changing your development? And that is the key thing. So what we really need to refocus around, I think, in the design of schooling is the development of the people in the system. And then the learning follows that. Right now, we've got the cart in front of the horse, right? The development should be pulling what the rest of the decision making is around what kids are doing in school, what teachers are doing in school, what counts as training for teachers, right? Which is also inadequate. And not setting people up to be successful in the role that they're taking on, which is to support the growth and development of young people as they engage with really difficult new ways of doing things and thinking about things, right? That's what school actually is. And it is simply not designed around that right now. We have made this false narrative in our mind that school is about what you can remember, right? And there's tons of learning science out there too, which is great science, very useful. It's a piece of the toolkit, right? But it's all about recall and retrieval and right and on cue. Can you remember how many bones are in the U.S. And then the human body, right? It's like, who cares, right? Unless you've got some reason to know that. How does knowing that change how I understand and think about the world? How does it change my dispositions of mind, is the way I've been thinking about it. How does it change the way in which I engage with learning and interacting and building things and innovating in things and achieving in a purposeful way over time? And when we rethink the aims of schooling to put the development of the people in the system first, then all of a sudden many things start to make sense that are really feeling very awkward and irrelevant to so many people who are caught up in the system, like yourself and myself when we were kids.
Are you placing your gaze on helping teachers? be more skilled at teaching, or are you placing your gaze on the system for specifically trying to get at the students?
Okay, so that's a complex question, right? So all of us as humans, we are deeply cultural, deeply social thinkers, right? We aren't little automaton robots who deploy, right? We are actually humans, and what that means is we have feelings, we have beliefs, we have values, and we have skills, we have experiences we bring, we have cultural ways of knowing about things that are based in the ways that we've experienced them with other people in the past. And we bring that to everywhere we go. And so the school system, the structure of how schools are set up, does not adequately support those very basic human capacities. In fact, it directly punishes and undermines them. So that is a major place where innovation is needed, serious innovation is needed. But it's not just about doing something different, giving teachers different tools to deploy, because again, they're not robots. They need to be humans and interacting in a whole range of dynamic, complex situations that they're going to encounter with a whole range of dynamic, complex people that they're teaching, right? And so what we really need to do is both things. Start by deconstructing the environment of schools, the structures of schools. But in order to do that, we need to have a North Star. We need to know what we're doing. We're not just taking apart the 45-minute bell schedule and replacing it with, I don't know, 2-hour block periods. Okay, that sounds good, right? We're taking away the desks and we're putting, beanbag chairs. Terrific, innovation accomplished, check, right? What we really need to do is think about, what are we trying to achieve here developmentally? How do we want people to think when they're here? How do we want them to develop feelings within the space of thinking? What does it mean to feel interested, to feel curious, to feel determined, right? About complex skills and information. What does it mean to have a sense of purpose that you build that connects to your newly emerging skills, that you can actually use them for something that, is purposeful in the world over time, that grows you and improves the world you're in? How do we help people feel that way about the process of thinking in schools? And then what would it take to actually design around that as our North Star? So the first thing is, yes, we're going to dismantle many of our school structures that are incompatible with human development, frankly, right? But just dismantling them and then replacing them with who knows what is not gonna do it. We actually need to step back and take a really hard, courageous look at the beliefs and the values that this current system is built around, and deconstruct those. Do those beliefs and values actually reflect what we want for our young people? I would say no. And if not, what do we want for our young people? And then how would we design for that?
Mm. You're describing the exact process that we go through working with a world-class athlete, or
Absolutely.
anybody that
Yeah.
wants to, in an uncommon way, transform and grow. So
Yeah.
what we do, let's say for an Olympian that, is on the world stage now, and we're trying to deconstruct, okay, what is it going to take to be your best and relative to other people's best in 4 years? So there's like a 4-year quad or 4-year time cycle that we think through. And we start with well, what is it do you think is going to be happening? What do you think you can do in 4 years' time? And then what do you think the world is going to be doing? Because there's always a reference point, which is important in some of these experiences. And then we say, right, yeah, is that really it? Is that really what you think? Yes.
Mhm,
Well,
mhm,
actually,
mhm.
if I'm and okay, so there's usually, when you double click, there's another thing. And then we get the fabric of that idea so clear. You use the word deconstruct, but we get the fabric of that idea so clear, it's like the planning of it just naturally unfolds. Like, okay, if we're going to do, let's say, some sort of quad flip, I'm just making this up because it's
Difficult.
concrete. Yeah, difficult and concrete, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, we got to be able to do the single. We got to be able to eventually ladder onto the double. Okay. So it just starts to make sense of how to plan.
Mhm.
And then what we've done in high performance anything, when humans are involved, we say, what are the necessary capabilities? Okay. So, well, we do need to understand the psychology and the physical and the nutritional and the medical, and then we just optimize for each one of those. So that I'm trying to be concrete, but not get down in a rabbit hole. How do you, because you had this really radical idea, deconstruct beliefs and values, better understand how we want people to think and feel and learn and be in the process of learning. What you just did is a radical idea to deconstruct those.
Yeah.
And I'm tempted to say, who, like as a model, who's doing that well, or ask you, if you had a white canvas, how would you start? Because I feel like there's going to be gold in both of those.
Yeah, can answer either of those questions. Let me just step back for one moment and lay a little brain science on the table.
Great.
Because I think one of the beliefs that we as a society hold, which turns out not to be true, okay, is that our abilities and our capabilities, as you said, and our skills and our cognitions they exist in you as a thing, right? Like if I could open up your head, I could look in there and see like, oh, look, you can do a quad flip, or like, no, you can't, but you can do a triple or whatever. Okay, I know nothing about that, right? They exist in there and you just need to deploy when the time is right, right? And then the other piece of that faulty conceptualization or schema around what it means to have ability is that our emotions about it, our social sort of contextualization, the cultural ways that we value that skill, that we enact that skill on the fly in different kinds of situations, that's separate from the skill itself in your head. That, how you feel and the emotion you're having and what you can do and what you know are somehow two things. And sure, they might impact on each other, right? And there is, at a certain level, right, some utility to that conceptualization from a scientific perspective, because what you're really doing is breaking down, in this case, an athlete's performance and saying, well, you can do a quad, and we know that because you did it in practice, but you didn't do it in this competition. And the reason is because you were too nervous. So your emotion interfered with your quad, right? But think about it a different way. Think about in the context, part of which is emotional context, in the meaning you're making of this situation right now, which is for you a competition that's very high stakes, let's just say, in the emotional, cognitive, cultural, developmental meaning of that situation, you don't have the capability to conjure up quad level understanding. You know what I mean? And so the skills themselves are tied to context. There are certainly things you can't do and don't know, but there's nothing that you can do and do know all the time. What you can do and what you know depends on the context.
Okay,
So,
wait. This
okay,
is rich. This is really rich because you are pulling apart two things that are intimately linked,
yeah,
which is the ability to do a skill repeatedly, the emotions that are connected to accessing that skill.
yeah,
And both of those are encapsulated in the context of the way that you're perceiving the upcoming experience, right? And so I'm going to ask you a question quickly to stay on this because this is I'll go back to the Olympics one more time, and
sure.
it's just an easy concrete model right now. Is that heading into the quad, I would typically ask the team or individuals to say, what's it going to be? When we arrive, the next Olympic game, Summer Games is in Paris. When we arrive in Paris, is the Olympic game for you the biggest show on earth? The largest, craziest, the most media driven, the most hype, the most important show on earth? Or is this another competition? The rules haven't changed. The size of the court hasn't changed. The ball weight hasn't changed. Fill in the blanks. And then to make a fundamental commitment to either one of those aims, to me, it doesn't matter. To make a fundamental commitment, choose one and train accordingly so that your context is familiar when you show up. And how would you enhance that or dismantle it and say, what are you doing to your clients?
No, you
Yeah.
must be doing something right, Mike, because you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
the line
yeah.
of work is going well.
Yeah, right.
No, I'd say you're doing it exactly right. And what you're talking about is exactly an example of what I'm saying, that two things are really important there. Skills are enacted within context, right? So it's not just being able to do a quad. There's no such thing. Yeah, you need to be able to have all the movements that go into a quad, but you need to be able to pull them together in a particular place and time that feels a particular way to you. And that's the second half. So context matters, and you're talking about that, and you're helping them explicitly imagine and decide upon a story you're telling yourself that you're embedding that skill into. Skills don't exist freeform, they exist in stories of context, which are, and this is the second half, deeply subjective on the part of the person. So the context is not what's happening by what other people are describing of what happened in the news story. It's how you feel and notice in that context yourself. So you can learn, in fact, skills for managing yourself into a particular storyline, a way of interpreting and making meaning, which shapes the way you feel emotionally, and the kinds of skills that become relevant in that conjured context story in your own mind. And that's my, as a cognitive scientist, way of saying you're doing the right thing. That's what you're doing, is helping somebody set up, not just because being able to do a quad in the Olympics is not just about being able to do a quad, it's being able to do a quad in the Olympics. So you got to have a meaning for that. It's got to pull together into a feeling space that is conducive and supportive feeling to you. And that is sort of commensurate or aligned with the aim of doing a quad, and not somehow undermining it or somehow in conflict with it or somehow unresolved, right? Because any of those three alternative scenarios will undermine your skillfulness at doing a quad, at getting it done in that time and place.
Okay, I want to take a quick little break here to talk about Brava. If you find cooking challenging, even starting with the decision-making process of like, what do you want to cook? I think I've got a good solution for you here. Brava is the most advanced, powerful, smart oven that I've ever experienced. They harness the power of light to cook faster than any other technology. Brava is one of the best decisions I've ever made to my kitchen. Not only does it, cook things much quicker, but there's minimal cleanup. The coolest thing about Brava is that, okay, I do all the prep work and then I put it in the oven and Brava does the cooking. And I know you might be thinking, isn't that what ovens do? Ovens cook? What happens with Brava is that you put in your food and they have the science to be able to regulate, oh, okay, so that is, those are the veggies. So those are going to cook this way. And this is the salmon and it's going to cook that way. But it's all in the same, it looks like a toaster oven. It's amazing what they've done. And their smart tech, they literally take care of the cooking. I don't stir, I don't check. There's actually a camera in there. And so you can watch it from your phone if you wanted to. And the whole thing is great. It's like having an extra set of arms in the kitchen. So punch over to brava.com to check out what they're doing. And then make sure to use the code Finding Mastery at checkout for an additional $200 off. That's Brava, BRAVA.com, and use the code Finding Mastery for $200 off. And Finding Mastery is brought to you by BioOptimizers. I've used their magnesium supplement now for a while. It was designed to help reduce stress, improve sleep, boost energy levels. And this product was already amazing. I loved what they're doing, but BioOptimizers has continued to research and improve it. And they've just released their new improved formula for magnesium breakthrough. This is their 4th generation of the formula. So they're working to get this thing dialed in. So on this one, they've got cofactors like B6 and magnesium to help with the absorption of magnesium. If you're unfamiliar with the value of magnesium, it's a significant one now, because if you don't get enough magnesium, sleep is impacted, energy is impacted, stress responses are impacted. So in every bottle of Magnesium Breakthrough, they're designing this to help you get 7 unique forms of organic full spectrum magnesium, which can, in return, dramatically improve your overall health. So simply take 2 capsules. That's what I do before I go to bed. And I think that you're going to be amazed by the improvements that you notice in mood and energy levels. So to learn more and to get 10% off, plus free shipping, head to magbreakthrough.com/finding mastery. So it's MAG, breakthrough.com/finding mastery, and use the code finding mastery during checkout. And with that, let's jump right back into this conversation. From a cognitive science perspective, when somebody does imagery and they're putting themselves in that context, they've created the narrative, they've used their imagination to see and feel to their highest level of ability what they hope it would feel like or what it might feel like, and then they see and feel themselves perform well in those environments. What's happening across the brain? What have you come to find is happening across the brain during imagery? And you might say, listen, I haven't dug there, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly what's happening right in that exact situation, but we can piece together evidence from many people's studies, including from ours, and I can give you a sort of satisfactory answer.
Great,
I hope.
great,
right.
great.
So one way to think about this, you need to kind of the brain is immensely complex, and we have to have some kind of schema for understanding. So I'm gonna right now say a useful schema, I think, is to reduce that complexity to something we call networks, which is basically, they're fractals. Okay, so you can have teeny little networks, or you can have gigantic, huge ones where the brain is only in 3 big networks or something, right? So we can look at it at any level of granularity. But for this big question, you're talking about integrating a whole context with a vision for something, with a memory for being there, with the emotions of experiencing it, with a whole bunch of skills that involve arms and legs and all kinds of stuff. So that's going to be whole brain kind of big deal networks, okay? Big picture dynamic networks. So think about it this way. There's kind of, you can sort of think of the brain at a very high, broad strokes level as having 3 big cortical networks that are most relevant to what you're talking about. Of course, there's other ones that are doing vision and that are making your heart beat and stuff. Okay, we're just gonna but we're gonna set those to the side for a minute. But the big ones at the level of the cortex that I think need to be coordinated here, you can kind of think about them as like forming like kind of a seesaw. Okay, so you got one network that's activated when we go down here. We got one network that's activated when you go over here, okay? And then you got a network over here that's telling you which way to flip the seesaw, all right? And so what are these? So first of all, the pivot, okay, that's saying like, wow, better do something, go this way or go that way, right? Is literally the like, network, okay? It's called in the brain the salience network. It has to do with affect. It has to do with physiological regulatory capacity, making your heart pound, feeling your digestion, your guts, noticing that, something is frightening or something that is relaxing, right? All of this emotional sort of physiological, regulatory, arousal related, all of that kind of stuff, okay? And then you've got kind of these 2 networks, which are more or less, you could think of them as kind of trading off with one another. But in activating or deactivating one, you're also facilitating the activation or deactivation of the other. So they're not independent of each other, right? And so one of them, you can call something like the executive control network or the frontal parietal network. There's like different names, and it can have different smaller parts depending on how you name it. It doesn't matter here. What matters is it's a network that kind of is like, whoa, pay attention into the world right now, move your arms and legs, maintain, focus on the immediate physical contextual features of what's happening. Super important for sports, right? Or for anything for that matter, for interacting with people appropriately, all that. And then, right, that's this, let's say. And then over here, you've got something that is loosely called versions of the so-called default mode network, which, is involved in, it's, from an embodied perspective, this one is arousal, right? This one is more like reading the state of your level of consciousness is kind of how you can think of it, like how awake, how aware, how like, what does it feel like inside of me to be me? And it's also a kind of, if you might think of it as sort of a context independent sort of narrative, right? So it's thinking about the things you can't see, directly, that you have the story that's in the background, the intentions that are underlying somebody's actions or psychological state, the moral or ethical implications, the episodic memories that go into something, right? Envisioning yourself in a particular scenario and playing it through, or the time it actually happened and reliving those memories, all of those kinds of thinking, imagining the future, right? Possible futures and impossible futures, right? Making sense out of the historical past and integrating those all together into some kind of meaningful feeling of me here and now that comes with a kind of story about why and how it's all coming together. That network is sort of, if you will, balancing with the like dig in and do, right? You can't imagine the deep historical significance of your quad in the Olympics at the same time as you're actually doing it. You know, you either dig in and like make the arms and legs go and you're paying attention to where the line is you have to land on or whatever. Okay, I know nothing about this. Or you're thinking about, gosh, I'm going to be the first, you know, whoever person to do this under these circumstances. That's a big historical achievement because, right? But you can't be thinking about the big picture story of inferred meaning and the actual actions at the same time. And so what do you need? You need to be able to actively, appropriately manage the way in which you move yourself. You notice, you activate or deactivate your physiology, so to speak, and move yourself into the brain / mind / emotional cognitive skill state that's conducive to the situation being, you know, adaptively managed. So if you're over here when you're supposed to be doing a quad, you're out of competition.
And the here is the default mode network in this
default,
case.
right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're over here, you're thinking it and you're doing it, okay, you're in the right place. But if you're doing this, that's going to undermine it too. So you really got to like marshal yourself into the appropriate space. And these spaces are balanced. So when you're practicing beforehand, you're planning it out. What you're doing is saying, yo, notice, think about it, feel it, get yourself worked up, try that out, and make a story out of it in your default, so to speak. So that when you get there, you know how to recognize it and you can move yourself into the like, make it happen, right? And so it's like a fluid kind of balancing act that you're always in. Okay. Does that make sense?
So it's great. So you've got three, let me just go quick pass. You've got three basic networks that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And one network is more about the arousal regulation, the emotional management piece, which is.
Did I make an error? Is, you know, is the, right, all that, like the, anything that makes you go, oh, wait, you know?
Yeah, okay. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's not just the limbic system, you're saying, which is like the amygdala and all that stuff.
There's much. It's the anterior middle cingulate, it's the dorsal and ventral anterior insula, it's the medial, there's lots of regions that are involved.
So it's, it's reaching, it's extending from what people might consider the amygdala or the limbic system, and it's reaching into some of the cortical thinking parts.
It's definitely cortically mediated, yeah. I mean, the limbic system is kind of a, you know, it's sort of a misnomer in many ways. It's defined like that because it was anatomically defined back before we had really
the function.
Functions, right? So people could show that these had things to do with basic arousal, fear, physiological regulatory capacity in a very, very basic sense, right? And so, you know, these systems were called a system, but actually, you know, the actual interconnectivity of these networks is those systems are integrated into systems that are doing all kinds of more complex deliberations. And there's automatic, quick, like, whoa, pay attention, that ball's coming at your head, right? That's more amygdala. But there's, you know, then what do you do with that, right? How does that feel to you? Does that excite you or does it freak you out? That bigger story about what it means and what you do next is also a part of what happens next time and how you learn. And right. So it's much bigger than just like that reactivity thing.
So people that are able to do something extremely well on command in a high stakes environment, they're able to damp down or optimize the first network that you're talking about. And then they're able to quiet the second network or the default mode network. So they're not checking in to see how they're doing.
Not at that moment, right?
Not at that moment. But they're allocating their resources towards the on-demand doing. And sometimes we talk about like paralysis by analysis, like overthinking, and then I just don't know how to respond. Okay, so on imagery, you would want to crank up some of the emotional, contextual.
Yeah.
You set the scene, crank up some of the emotional responses that you think might take place, and then damp down or just get the story right. So you're getting those two networks, and then the third network, which is the seeing and feeling yourself doing, would be a complete absorption to ready yourself, familiarize yourself with when it might happen later. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And the other thing to know about the brain is that the networks you use to visualize or to feel yourself moving your arms and legs in space, for example, are the same ones that actually move your arms and legs in space. So there's lots of good research showing that when you even visualize doing certain kinds of skills, you actually improve your ability to do even like a physical skill, like a tapping thing with fingers, right? You can learn it by practicing it, but you can also learn it by imagining practicing it while your hands are not moving. You won't get quite as good, but you'll still get better, right? So
Okay.
it's like your brain isn't duplicative. It doesn't have like the thinking about it place and then the it and the thinking about it are the same thing. Mhm.
That non-redundancy aspect of the brain is really important because you can activate different parts of the brain through imagination, to your point, and then thereby enhancing skill. But it's also like this, it's a mystery still. Like, how is this happening?
Yeah,
Like
nobody
how?
really fully has got
Yeah,
that. Yeah, we don't know
it's what a
for sure.
fun science this is.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so let's stay on the default mode network, and then we're going to come back up to schools and systems and learning in a minute. So you're so skilled on the default mode network, and I don't have the right language. I understand the value. I have some limited language on what it's doing, but I think I've oversimplified it. My understanding from a very narrow perspective of the default mode network is checking in to see if I'm okay, contextually understanding, am I okay in this moment? And I think I've over rotated on the reduction part here, but can you help me understand if that is in fact the case and the other regions that are, or the other functions of that network that are materially important?
Let me just say, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies on the development network, and we don't fully understand, right? These are all just ways of trying to explain the data that we're seeing, which are extremely complex and dynamic and emergent. Okay, so that's the first thing. But rather than saying checking in on am I okay, I would say more like the default mode network systems are conjuring okayness, right? They are the feeling of their activation is what is enabling awareness of self. It is the substrate for the sense of being okay, separate from the actual being okay, right? You see what I'm saying? Like you could be ill or injured, right? But like what I'm talking about is it's really about conjuring the subjective awareness of that state, which is a story-like construction. It
Yes.
can be very,
Yes.
very different depending on the cultural way in which you value it, right? So a classic example of this is the pain that's associated with like childbirth, right? It's like the kind of thing that you would never live through if it weren't for a really important social, aim, right? The reason you're doing this thing is just incredibly emotional and meaningful, and it's all of that. Otherwise, why the heck would anybody ever do that, right? So it's like that. It's the story, it's the meaning, it's the cultural way of being there that makes the pain feel different. And
Okay. Okay.
does that
So
help?
that does help. And then okay, let me do a reductionist because you just expanded this in a healthier way for me. Is this, if there was a place, and I know that I know the problems with what I'm saying here, but if there was a primary place that fear of people's opinions, FOPO, would it live in the default mode network? Would that be the place out of those three networks that we're just describing that um
Well, it might be a little more complex than that. I mean,
okay,
definitely
let's
more
go.
complex than that, but you could
Yep.
think about different kinds of uh, the different ways in which that fear of other people's opinions may be conjured differently depending on the kinds of neural, the neural systems that are doing the work at that time, right? So the default mode network is going to be where you're telling stories to yourself about, the wondering of what the other person might be thinking that I can't see, right? That's that like narrative construction of stuff that is inferential, that's emotionally engaged, that's all that stuff that's meaningful. So there's all that. But then there's also social anxiety, which is much more direct, which is involving much more fundamentally things like the amygdala, where it's just like people's eye contact at me. It's like everybody's looking at me, right? Like anybody who's ever raised a teenager knows there's a period of development where it's like, even for just a couple of weeks, they're like, why is everybody staring at me? You know what I mean? And that's neurological, right? And the rest of us have, neurotypical people, like there's a range of sensitivity to that, right? But like, and sometimes autistic people really have a high level of sensitivity to it. Some people have a markedly low. It's also shaped by culture. When you go to somewhere in the world where the eye gaze norms are somewhat different, you develop your brain around those norms so that those norms feel normal. And if they're violated, then you feel like something weird happened, right? So there's also that piece of it where fear of other people's opinions can also be just flat, got a social anxiety perspective to it, right? So I think those two things. And then there's also a third piece potentially, which is I'm telling myself stories about what other people are thinking about that she's going to think that I'm right, whatever. But then you also can plan, I'm sort of pushing it forward in the head now, where you can also use those stories to guide your behavior as you planfully move forward and execute with the things that you're going to do next. And it seems like part of fear of other people's opinions is also how you let those conjured narratives about what other people are thinking relative to what you think they ought to be thinking about you, how you let those shape the way you engage going forward.
That's it. Yeah, and that's the third network, more the executive functioning, the go do
network. The go do it network, because now you're going to start seeing in the world the things that are reaffirming the narrative you were constructing for yourself.
That's okay. Yeah. All right. I think I'm on the right track. I need some sophistication in it, but the idea that I think is compelling to me is that it's a latent and pervasive experience for many of us that we are checking and are we okay? I'm thinking that's like we're talked about. It's too limited, but it's in that network.
Yeah.
And then we're giving some meaning to it, and then it's influencing the decisions that we make, which is like, am I going to go or not go? Am I going to wear this or not wear that? Am I going to say this or not say that? And it's this linking between those two networks that is mediated by that first network we talked about, which is, that arousal, emotional, regulatory, experience. And
which is also part of am I okay, right? This is
like okay?
Also the network that feels physical pain in the guts and viscera, for example.
Okay, so label those three networks for me. Like, give me one.
This is very rough. Like, don't go out to neuroscience. It should be like it's exactly these parts, but like you can think of this as kind of like the salience network.
Okay.
This is kind of like the default mode network, and this is kind of like the executive control network.
Executive control. Yeah. Okay. Not functioning. You use the word control specifically.
Well, control is a major part of functioning. How do you function? You function in a regulated, organized way, not just flailing around. So control and motoric functioning are actually not redundant in the brain. They are leveraging the same systems.
Okay, I want to take a quick little break right here to talk about Carol. Carol Bike offers the shortest, most effective cardio workout around. I love what they're doing. I love the science that sits underneath it, the whole thing. It's the only AI-powered exercise bike that scientifically has evidence to give you the benefits of a 45-minute run in as little as 5 minutes. So Carol saves you time for the things that matter most to you in life. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the recent Finding Mastery episode with Carol CEO and co-founder Ulrich Dempfli, I highly recommend you go check that out. We discuss the science behind Carol, and it's based on an idea called REHIT, Reduced Exertion High-Intensity Interval Training. It's a new approach. It's definitely inspired, and in my opinion, it's an advancement from the kind of the origins of HIIT, High-Intensity Interval Training. So folks that are on a time budget, you've got to check this thing out. This bike provides an opportunity to push your body and your mind to new limits, helping to improve cardio, to boost metabolism, reduce your risk of diabetes, dropping blood pressure, increasing good cholesterol. So Carol is the only way to get the full benefits of Rehit outside of a lab setting. So it's developed with scientists, backed by research, and trusted by more than 16,000 riders. So you can experience Carol for yourself with free delivery and a 100-day trial. If you don't love it, return it. No questions asked. Visit carolbike.com and use the code Finding Mastery to get your free lifetime Carol membership, normally charged at $12 a month. And Finding Mastery is brought to you by Athletic Greens. I love Athletic Greens. If you've been part of this community, you know that. If you're new here, I just want to encourage you to go check out what they're doing. And so I've been using Athletic Greens for just about 8 years now, and I'm stoked on it. I love the energy levels that I have on a daily basis, and Athletic Greens is part of that equation. It's just one scoop is all I use of Athletic Greens, and inside that, there's 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, adaptogens, all to help, get the day started right. I use it in the morning. So their special blend of ingredients are designed to support gut health, nervous system, immune system, energy, recovery, focus. They're thinking about aging in some of their vitamins and minerals that they've put together as well. So right now, I think it's a great time to invest in your immune system for obvious reasons. And so there's no need for a million different pills and supplements to look after your health. Athletic Greens is making it super simple. It's one scoop, and then free 1-year supply that they're offering us for vitamin D. And they're also throwing in 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. So just punch over to athleticgreens.com/finding mastery. Again, it's athleticgreens.com/finding mastery. And with that, let's jump right back into our conversation. Let me throw a lob over to you and say, where do you want to go next? Because I love your work, and I've got so many questions about systems around school and education and methodologies for teaching well. And then you also gave a gem about beliefs and values. So I just want to lob it to you and say, where do you want to explore the next part of this conversation?
You can go wherever you want, Mike. I mean, I'll make one comment though, and that is, this is something that's sort of implicit in the conversation you're having, but which I think is actually not so obvious in education settings like it is in sports performance settings, which is that in order to build out the capacities to manage yourself in a context and make stuff go, the person themselves needs to build out those capacities. That means the whole thing, they need to slowly start to engage with in order to build the capacity to engage it more systematically over time. In school, we do it for you way too much. We manage it, we hypermanage it, we micromanage it, we control it, we test it, we gate it, depending on whether you pass this test, you can go right. And we don't let people actually have the deep skill building experience of managing themselves in difficult intellectual spaces. And you only build your mind and brain and skills by managing it yourself, by doing the work of doing it. And we do not let that happen. It's inefficient, it's messy, right? It's got false starts. It's a little bit not, perfectly standardized. We don't have tolerance for that in our education system.
Make it concrete. Give me an example so I can get my arms around what is happening now that you're saying is violating some of the core principles of learning.
So let me give you a counterexample of somewhere it's done really, really well.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you'll
Cool.
be like, oh yeah, we don't do that.
Great. Yeah, great.
So, when my own kid, one of my kids was in 10th grade, we sent her to school in Denmark. And in Denmark, just for 1 year, right? She had to learn Danish. So it's not something that's a solution for everybody because she was the only foreign kid. But in Denmark, they have these 1-year residential intensive programs that there are these schools that only run for 1 year at a time. Kids just only come for 1 year. And they're themed. So they're built around a particular kind of interest or skill set that kids, and they can just, how you get in is you just sign up. You can only sign up for one. So you got to pick one. You sign up and you're in. Your first 130 people, you're in, right? The government helps pay for it and all that. So it's a very different kind of society, right, than here. And I'm not saying take Denmark and put it here, but I'm just saying they've designed these schools. There are schools that are known for their sports. There are schools known for their orchestra music is one of them. Every kid across Denmark who's super into orchestra music takes their 10th grade year and goes and does orchestra with all the other Danish kids who love orchestra, gives concerts, teaches lessons, does all the whole thing, right, for a year, really engages them. My daughter went to a kind of a interdisciplinary, they called it a social studies school, which was really about, over the door in Danish, it said, find yourself. That's what it's about. You go in there, they've got artist studios, they've got recording stuff, they've got dance studios, they've got sports, they've got outdoors. They send the kids on 3-day camping, hiking trips by themselves, and they have to plan out without cell phone, like all these kinds of things. They've got academic classes that they can choose to be in, all this stuff. So here comes my kid, who's like a super good student, you know what I mean, does what you're supposed to do, and gets there. And, for example, she goes into math class, and because she signed up for the math sciencey kind of stuff for one of her whole tracks, because she loves that. And, and she called me and she's like, I already know all this math they're doing. It's like basic, algebra and geometry, whatever. I'm doing pre-calculus. Like, why am I here? And the teacher said to her, just stay here. You're learning Danish. You're making new friends. Just try it. And as she got further into it, she realized, she's like, this is a completely different way to do math than I've ever done it in an American school, because they don't give you the problem. We give kids problems, they solve the problem. You got it right, you got it wrong, right? There, right. They give you they give you the problem in that we're gonna all shoot off rockets across this field. You need it to land as close as possible to that dot. What angle should you shoot it and how much force? They don't tell you what math pertains. You got to go figure out, is this a geometry problem? Is this a calculus problem? Is this right? Should I just fling it and try it a few times and see what happens, right? Like, you figure out the math you need. They don't neatly tie it up with a little bow. And when you get done, you've done it because they told you, here's the list, right? So here's the next part. So she signs up to do physics, with something different than she'd ever done before, that she was scared to do. There's no rubric, there's no grading, there's no, right? They give them a whole curriculum around something and she was doing a project on it and she was like showing it to the teacher and getting feedback. And they're like, well, what about these ideas? Explain to me how you're thinking there. And she's like, well, am I done yet? Is it good? Am I done? Do I move on? They're like, I don't know. Are you done? Do you want to move on? Or do you still have more to work on, right? It's up to the kid. And she called me she'd call me every night before she was going to bed, and about January or so. And she'd been there for months already. She found this so difficult that nobody told her what's expected. What did you got an A+? Pat you on the head, you worked hard, right? They're always like, well, what's the next thing you want to try, right? And she got there and she said, Mom, I realized something about myself that I'm embarrassed to admit this, but and I was like, yeah. She's like, those kids who in high school kind of have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever, not because they really love the person, but just because they want to have somebody there to eat lunch with every day, who tells them they look nice and laughs at their jokes so they don't walk into the party alone and all that. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, I realized that's grades for me, right? That's grades for me. I don't really think getting an A is smart. It's just that I stuffed it in my pocket to remind myself how hard I worked and how great I'm doing and how much potential I have as a student. They just won't give me that here. It all has to come from me. I need to figure out, am I done? Am I smart? Did I work hard or not? Did I learn anything? It's up to me. And the hardest part of school was to figure that out. But imagine how much she learned from that. Nobody's going to come along and tell you, congratulations, you got it right. You now go into Harvard or Stanford or whatever, right? You just invent it. You stop and think with experts, unpack what you did, deconstruct your understanding. What could have been other things? Why'd you decide to do it this way? All that stuff. And then you figure out, am I done yet? Have I learned what I'm going to learn? Is it time to move on? Or do I still have more work to do? We outsource the most important part of the learning and development process onto a standardized curriculum, and then wonder why people aren't motivated and don't have the ability to actually solve complex problems when they get done with our school system for the most part, because they're waiting for somebody to tell them what to do and whether they did it well or not. But that's not in the real world how things happen, right?
It's not. And I want to add to that at one other level, which is we outsource our self-esteem, our sense of value
That's right.
by looking to the person
That's
to the
exactly
expert.
what she was saying about the, like, that's the boyfriend thing, like for grades for me, right? She's like, I just am dying for somebody to tell me I did a great job and I'm so smart and you worked so hard. And nobody will say it. She's like, they won't say it. You know what I mean? That's just not what they do. That's not their job as teachers. Their job as a teacher is to help you think about your work, help you figure out what you want to do next, point you to resources. They're not going to tell you whether it's done or not, whether it's good or not. That's not their job.
Okay, so how would you begin to fold in some of those best practices or better practices in the American system or the US system?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple things, and it's very, very tricky. So the first thing I just want to quickly, before I talk about how to fold it in, and there are people doing it, right? This is not happening anywhere in the US. There are pockets of visionary, very, very skilled educators who are doing this with a range of kinds of kids, right? Around the country. And, I can talk about them. But before I do it, I want to first say, this is where the values and beliefs conversation comes in.
Okay,
because
perfect.
you need to know what you're redesigning around. And so often the school systems, and it's not their fault, right? They're overworked, they're underpaid, they don't know what they're aiming for. They don't know what it looks like to have high achievement. They think high achievement is high achievement on our standardized metrics, but that's like a circular argument, right? So if you're aiming for high quality development, full self-actualization of every youth in that system as they engage deeply with whatever it is they are interested in and good at, and bring that to bear on the world so they make the world a better place together. If you want to think about it that way, then we need to really help educators and parents and all society actually understand what learning is and what achievement actually entails. Not just success on these pre-designed standardized metrics. Those can be useful little things. She did fine on her SAT and whatever, right? But that's a little game on the side just to prove you can do it, right? The important part is, how do you think? How do you engage with the meaning you're making out of your opportunities to be in the world, taking with you the skills and ways of thinking about stuff and the tools you've learned in school? Can you leverage those for something for good out here? Can you write editorials? Can you organize businesses? Can you do you notice a need and then figure out a way to engage with other people to manage that need, right? All of those kinds of sort of self-starter, skills for managing yourself in a complex world need to be at the fore. We need to be thinking about those as hallmarks of achievement and skillfulness and intelligence and scholarliness. And so when we shift what the outcome is, what we're aiming at, and let me just be clear, this is not code speak for anything goes, or sloppy academic skills and wrong answers in math is fine. That's right. You're not going to get your rocket to the right place if you didn't calculate properly, right? You have to do it properly. The proof is in, did it work or not? And then deconstructing what happened and what you learned from that, right? So it's a very different way of assessing. So a major problem, and it's not just me saying this, right? A major problem with our education system, and it comes out of a deep desire to do right by kids. So it's not like it's evilly intended, right? But a major problem is that we have tried to legislate intentions, right? By instituting a standardized and very rigid system of accountability, achievement, high stakes testing as the way that we judge our education system outcomes.
As you say that, I almost can't get out of. It's like that solution has been dropped in and so ingrained in me, and I haven't spent
you've never unpacked it to say, well, what does that actually show? If your kid can get 100% on that thing or gets a 50% on that thing, What does that mean?
Well, that is less concerning to me. Other than I point taken. Where I'm going with it is like, what else? I've swallowed that pill.
Right.
That the
Yeah.
SATs or whatever.
Yeah.
And so
Right. Check. Yeah.
how else do you do this? Like,
So other ways that this is done, and there are so-called progressive or alternative schools, right? That
yeah,
in New York City, for example, there's a whole consortium of schools. They're not all the same. They're all different, but they all have a shared value around and deconstructed structures too. A shared value around very deep developmental performance-based assessment. So in other words, and this kind of aligns with sports in that sense, like the proof is in can you do it, right? So kids work in various ways in different schools, right? But they work intensively on portfolios of work that they design in collaboration with teachers, with experts, with community members. They iteratively rework them, they present them publicly, they get feedback, they move forward, they step back. Now, does this mean that we can just all have portfolio-based assessment and Shazam, the education system might be better? Absolutely not, because the people helping institute that need to really, really understand not just what a final portfolio looks like, that is, graduation quality, but also how you recognize the developmental paths that different kids are taking to move themselves in a process-oriented way toward being able to manage that kind of complex, engaged thinking that goes into making a portfolio of high school graduation quality or something like that. So it really puts a huge burden on the teachers to be development experts. They need to recognize in young people by talking with them, by working with them, by examining their work and talking with them about how they did it. They need to recognize in young people the paths that little Mikey is taking that aren't aligned with the standardized thing maybe, but he's got some good ideas. Let me steer you this way. Try it this way, Mike. And then right? So they really have to help the kid engage in the process, which is exactly what you're talking about when you're preparing people for the Olympics, right? There's no test you pass. There's a performance-based thing you pass, right? Mm-hmm. And it's expected that it's going to be dynamic. Some days you'll do great and some days you might not, right? And that's the nature of it. Well, guess what? It's not different in math or social studies or science experiments. Some days the things I design come out to be really important ideas, and some days they flop, but it's what I do with that over time. But we don't have a tolerance for engaging with that learning / developmental process in our young people. And that is where we need to reorient around that. And that's going to take a very different kind of structuring of our school success metrics, our assessments, our graduation milestones and all those kinds of things. And it's going to take a very different way of preparing our communities, our kids, and our teachers and administrators to appreciate the developmental processes that they're seeing and should be nurturing in students, rather than the developmental outcomes, which are easy to measure, but are very poorly mapped onto what actually the kid has developed into.
You're going to need all the fire in this conversation that you naturally come with.
I know. People tell me, but it's not possible. But I'm like, well, darn it, I'm going to give it a pretty good whirl. I got one life on this planet. I'm going to see what I can do.
Oh God. Okay. So let's do something digestible or snackable. What can parents do at home?
Yeah.
To start to shift the home narrative just a little bit. What are some controllables that we can do?
Great. That's great. So what I would say is engage thoughtfully and listen and ask questions as your kids are sharing with you how they're thinking, and have conversations, do things together, and stop and unpack what it is. If your kid brings home a test, it doesn't matter what their grade was. That's not the start of the conversation. The start is, hey, tell me about this problem. I see you did it like this or like that. Maybe it was right, maybe it wasn't right. Doesn't matter. They're engaged with you. Like, oh, do you see where so that's actually not valid that your right triangle has this, that, and the other. So no wonder it didn't work out. You know what I mean? So you really start to engage with the child in a process-oriented way and take the power away as much as you can, but it's very difficult in today's world. Take the power away from the standardized outcome metric, right? Take the power away from the standardized outcome metric. Here's another really quick story. My other kid, when he was, 5th grade, kid, lucky little duck he was, he managed to get himself selected to be at the Ad Astra school, which doesn't really exist anymore in the same form, but it was Elon Musk's little micro school inside of SpaceX. And my husband worked at SpaceX at the time, and whatever. So took Teddy over, dropped him off, let him play around with all the stuff, and they let Ted be a student, right? So my kid was a student there, and he lots of stuff. I can talk about that for a long time. It's amazing. But a story I want to tell is in January, again, halfway through the year, that seems to be the pivot point, right? Where he comes home, and this is not a kid he's a kid who does, obviously, it's a bright kid, motivated kid, right? This is a kid who came home from 1st grade, first time he'd been in school all day, about 2 weeks into the school year. Sunday night, he's crying, I don't want to go to school, I don't want to go to school. I'm like, what's the matter? I'm thinking, is he getting bullied at school? What's going on? He finally said to me, I'm laying there on his bed with him, trying to put him to sleep. He finally says to me, Mommy, I have so much work to do. How do you expect me to get my work done if I'm sitting in school all day? Right? That's Ted. Okay?
That's an indictment on like the learning environment for sure.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, that's Ted, and it's a pretty good school, right?
And you know what? This sounds exactly like what people in the modern workforce are talking about. They're like, listen, I'm in meeting. Yeah, I'm not doing my work until after dinner.
Right. Yeah. How am I going? I've got all this stuff. I'm building sets of armor. I'm, whatever he was doing at that time in his life. Right. It's like, yeah. Okay. So that's Ted. So you get him in 6th grade, halfway through the first school year. He wasn't a kid who like brought home schoolwork and put it on the fridge. I'd have to take it out of his backpack. Go, oh, look at this. Yeah. Right. So he puts this math test on the fridge. I'm like, okay, Ted just put a math test on the fridge. And again, like, this is that, like, let me think about what it says. So I'm like, hey, Ted, see, your math test is on the fridge. You must be really, wanting us to see it. I see you got a 50%. He's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. So tell me about it. It's like, this is amazing, Mom. Look at this. You see this over here, this question? Well, I didn't get it right. But my teacher said I hadn't seen this kind of math before, but the other kids had, but I just joined this year. So I hadn't seen it, but I did figure out part of it. And she said, next year I was going to learn about how to do this part. So, I really kind of got some of the answer right. And then this other one over here, like, I didn't know how to do it, but I thought hard about it and I tried it a different way. And my teacher said, this was good thinking. I mean, it was very interesting, but this one I actually got because he was so excited about that math test that he got 50% on. You know what I mean? Because it was like, look how much I managed to figure out on a test that's like a real math test, that's got calculus problems on there or whatever. He's like, I didn't know how to do it, but I sort of made it with rectangles and I got something sort of like it and I got 50%. Look at me.
And was there no part of you that was like, oh my kid is going to end up in like shambles when it comes to college? Like, there's no part of you that raced forward.
There's a tiny part that's like, oh my God.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Gonna get it. But it's tiny. And I shut it up really quick. And like, whatever, it doesn't matter. But like my daughter, people were like, oh my gosh, you're sending Nora to Denmark for a year. She's missing AP physics. She's trying to learn it in Danish. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's going to be terrible. Now the kid's at Stanford, right? And being like, whatever, it's a crapshoot, but she's doing great. Okay. Like she She just did her thing. You're not educating your kid. And I don't know, my kid isn't in college. I don't know if he's going to get in or not. We'll see what happens. If he doesn't, he'll go to community college, make it go, and then get himself in wherever's got the program he's interested in. Like, I don't care. It's what you build out of yourself.
Well, you know,
that
okay.
matters.
So just on that, this is a really important note for me, because when I first got into my professional life, I didn't want to tell people where I went right out of high school,
Which was where?
because a 2-year school.
Great.
I couldn't get into,
They're great.
yeah, I couldn't get into a 4-year because I didn't take the SAT. I went surfing, or the PSAT. I went surfing. And so now I'm like, listen, I navigated, and I had people along the way that helped shape me, that I trusted, like,
Right.
try this and try that. And have you thought about this and that? And so I found 3 professors at this 2-year school that was
Right.
like, I mean, I fell in love with the invisible, learning philosophy, psychology, and theology. I was like, this is amazing. And so it set me down a path where I was reading more than the professors would ever expect anyone to read, because I was lit on fire with it.
Yeah,
So
I've heard this story before, by the way, Mike.
yeah. And so, like, there is hope, but I think it's the harder path.
It's the less
offbeaten.
efficient path.
It's less traveled. There's definitely more potholes. There's a couple cliffs with some shales that can break away. Like it, I could have been easily where most of my friends ended up, which is not,
a good place.
It's really, really hard. So I share that. And I hear you say that, and you're working at one of the top universities on the planet, and obviously you value education. So, like, to hear you say that, I'll just share one other context. Is that the school my son is at, the headmaster of the school says, okay, we're making a shift. We're moving from helping kids prepare to go to the best school to the best fit. Parents revolted. That headmaster it got run out. And I stood up and I was like, right, I love this. And like, I had all these heads look at me like, oh, you must not understand excellence. You must not understand. You do not understand what it takes to be, because I'm not very involved in the school in that way. And so he's out, and we're back into the, kind of grind.
I see a lot of that.
Yeah.
But that's a false narrative. I understand. I've written a blog post about this. I can send, actually.
Oh, please do.
I'll send it to you. It's like years ago, but I got this thing from my daughters in public middle school saying, like, do you want to hit the ground running in 9th grade and outcompete and get into the top school? Let us help you strategize. And I was just like, oh my gosh, right? Get out, you know what I mean? Like, what is wrong with this developmentally? Here's the thing, all my daughter's friends were the ones who were doing all that stuff, and they're, in real good schools now, no doubt about it. But that does not guarantee that you're a happy person or that you're going to actually achieve in the long run. I too took a very circuitous route, but then I came to my work with a very deep purpose, of, engaging why I wanted neuroscience, why I wanted education. The thing is, when you take your kid's math test and you deconstruct it around the ideas of the math, and forget about the grade, what you're actually ironically doing is helping the kid learn math and become interested in math and know what it means to understand and engage with things in a systematic, deep, intellectual way. Our schools don't value that. For the most part, we just want the outcome metric. We don't care how they got there. And it's very superficial and short-lived. Even, I don't want to use names, but even at the super high level, university that my kid's at now, even there, it doesn't matter, but she's even on the standardized metrics there in the final exam, she's outperforming her peers. She's in the top few percentile. Why? Because these kids who came from super high performing, private schools to get them in, which she did not, right? They don't know what it means to understand something. They know what it means to have the right answer. They know what it means to react. If somebody gives you this, you give them that. But when you get to that level and they're saying, here's a problem, what do you think about it? They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do.
Yeah. Okay. So let's stitch this right into, how do you help teach? If you're the parent and or you are a supervisor in a business context, whatever it might be, how do you help somebody learn? What are the ways to fully have their brain engaged with the outcome or
You
the
help
process.
them by supporting their developmental process, understanding, how they're thinking about things and what really good thinking about things in that space would look like, and help them to see that and to try that on. That's what you do. You have to, that's sort of more developmental way of mentoring and teaching. You're helping that person discover in themselves the strengths they need to be able to do the thing,
How do you
right?
do it without inspecting? So I found that there's a fine line between exploring and inspecting. And
Oh,
so
inspecting.
inspecting without like show me, like prove to me or some sort of like critical lens on it. How do you approach the
Oh, well,
difference between those two?
I would bring a critical lens. I mean, if my kid's bringing home an English paper, I'm not going to pussyfoot around when the ideas are, seem haphazard or they're contradictory. You're saying your thesis is this, but these two paragraphs don't actually prove that, right? I don't care if your teacher gave you a 40 out of 40. This paper doesn't make sense. Let's sit down and deconstruct it and figure out how you really would make it argue for what you wanted to say. So you're starting with that person's idea, you're validating their idea, but you're doing them the honor of actually legitimizing their own idea as a worthy aim, and then helping them to actually achieve it, as compared to just, somebody else telling you you've achieved it.
Got it.
I am very critical. Ask any of my grad students. We go through every word of every paper that gets submitted out of my lab. We write them, they write it, and then we go back through every single thing. And we think, is that what you mean? Is this what you want to say? Does this title reflect, if somebody just sees the title, is this what you want to say? Is that absolutely correct, given what the data were, right? It's extremely tight. This is not just a loosey-goosey, anything goes,
Cool.
right? But it's harder than actually, like when my daughter Nora went to Denmark, just somebody says, you meet this standard, you are done. Well, that's easy. I just took all the work away from you figuring out whether you actually engaged with something at a particular standard of complexity or not.
Well, I'm inspired by what you're talking, like how you're, and then I see my son. He's so casual. He's like, yeah, it's good. Like the 50%. Yeah, 85%. I did pretty good. And I'm like, well, hold on. Did you do your best? And he's like, I think so. It's like, you don't know what your best is yet, son. Like, so I get nervous on the other side of it, with the younger minds. And I know how to have that conversation with adults, but with the younger minds, I don't. So can you just course correct that a little bit for us parents?
No, I would forget the 85%. I'd sit down. If my kid brought home an 85% in class, we'd sit down and look at it, right? And if he brought home 102, we'd still sit down and look at it. Be like, hey, how did you figure out this problem? Tell me about it, right? I mean, right? So you're not going to privilege wrong answers as the topics of conversation over right answers. You're going to have conversations about the actual math. Show me what you're learning. Tell me about it. Let's go through your test paper together. Wow, number one, like, how did you do that? Explain that to me. Oh, that relates to that concept we were talking about last week with the triangles, right? Or no, help me, right? Like, you and him have a real conversation where you're both learning together and you're modeling what it looks like to think deeply about what happened in that test, and leave the freaking 85% out of there. But you also have to play the game a little, but you've got to set up everything I'm talking about first, right? Then you play the game a little. Right now, my kid's a junior. I'm like, dude, you got to bring home straight A's at this point because you're flying to college next year. So if there's something in there that you're not getting an A on, we do have to fix that, because you know what I mean? Like, it's going to have to happen, or it's up to you, but then you're going to curtail the opportunity you have to make choices next year about where you want to go. So
I'm relieved to hear you say that, because that's the exact narrative. We're just talking about keeping the opportunities as wide as you possibly can. And one of the ways to do that is have, the best output you have on your current grades, but that's not for a while. We're not into that discussion. He's in 7th grade, so it's fine. So, okay. Like, I love this. What you
want right now is a kid who has, here's the thing. You want a kid who has within himself the self-discipline to make himself focus and follow through on whatever it is he likes doing and cares about and wants to be good at.
Oh, cool. We got that. I'm actually having to help him shut down like his studying at night to get good sleep, and shut down like get him out of the gym because he's loving volleyball. Like I'm having to kind of pull him out of the environment.
Yeah,
So
you got to help them balance a little.
yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Okay. All right. Um, Tell me about like your lab. And many labs look for funding, and I don't know if your funding is but tell me about your lab and the funding situation, what you're studying.
Yeah. So yeah, we do have to find funding.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah. My position is funded, right? I'm
Yep.
a tenured professor, which basically means the university has agreed to pay for me in perpetuity, so long as I don't break the
Speak
law.
on. You
And
speak on. Yeah.
yeah,
Whatever you
exactly.
want. Yeah. That's
Right.
good.
It
Yeah.
takes a lot to get to that point, right? You got to
Hmm.
really prove you've got a fire under you.
Hmm.
So I'm not paying for myself. I could teach my couple of classes, go to my faculty meetings, do my service, and go home. Or I could, try to change the world, right? So that's what I'm doing. So how do I change the world? I have to bring in the money for all of that. So we do it a couple ways. One way is we write grants, right? And there's like the National Institute of Health, the National Science Foundation. There are various kinds of foundations, family foundations, and other kinds of academic foundations that fund work competitively. And we're constantly trying to, explain our ideas, justify them to peer reviewers and all that, to try to bring in the funds to do the projects we want to do. So that's one thing, and we've been very successful at that, but it is a constant struggle. And then the other thing is we have philanthropists, and we're also searching for a partner right now. We have a few leads, but there's always room for philanthropic support from people who just really believe in the work. And who really believe in the aims and are willing to let us become a little more programmatic and open-ended with the way in which we dig in on this. And so what I'm trying very hard to fund right now is the center I founded right before the pandemic, the Center for Affective Neuroscience Development, Learning, and Education, which we are actively working in schools with teachers, with administrators, with policymakers, with parents. We're conducting research with teachers, doing MRI research with teachers, also going in and observing teachers, like teachers who are really great, that the kids really focus, and learn from and trust, right? Trying to lift up what they're doing, especially middle and high school teachers, because, they just get not appreciated at all. We don't really understand at all the kind of social work and emotional engagement that goes into effective teaching in those tough disciplinary contexts, like intellectual disciplinary contexts. So we're studying teachers, we're trying to lift up what they do, we're trying to write papers about that, do talks about that. And then we're also studying kids, understanding how it is that they make meaning of the things that they've witnessed, the stories and narratives that they construct in their mind, how they learn from the news, from the things they see, and then what do they turn that into in terms of a lesson for themselves. And the way that those, sort of constructed narratives actually, we're finding, literally grow the teenagers' brains over time, above and beyond the effects of IQ, above and beyond the effects of family socioeconomic status, parents' education level, the ways kids interact with complex stories about other people's lives and try to make sense out of it for themselves and then apply it in their world. Just the way they do that actually grows their brain in all kinds of important ways. Mm-hmm.
Okay, real quick, because you've got a predictive model of success for middle school adolescents about self-actualization, success in school, relationship satisfaction. Like you've got some indicators, some positive indicators
For
for
sure.
later. So
Yeah.
just
We
really
followed the
quickly.
kids
Yeah.
longitudinally in young adulthood and saw that, yes, indeed, 5 years ago, the ways kids were talking about Malala's story in Pakistan, when we played the videos and talked to them about it, all that actually predicts their brain growth over time. And the
But it's the
brain
way,
growth.
it's not that they were just talking about it. It's the way that they were talking
That's
about.
right. That's the
Okay.
meaning they were making. Were they curious? Did they try to extract what we're calling these transcendent lessons? Things that would be true for me in my world that have the same sort of intention behind them, even though the situation's not the same here, right? And as kids did that, what we could show is that it was related to the way they were managing their real social world around them. So kids who did this more also had a better acceptance of diversity, of friendships. They had a stronger sense of what we're calling values-based life goals. So the things they are trying to achieve in school, they're doing for a bigger purpose than just to get the thing done. All that kind of stuff. They're happier, they have better relationships. And then that brain growth. So we're not talking about across kids whose brain is like what? We're talking about Mike 2 years ago, Mike now, Mary-Helen
Right.
2 years ago, Mary-Helen now.
Right.
How has my brain changed? We can predict it by the way I'm like curiously engaging, saying like, not just Malala, like, oh, that poor girl, that's terrible. I hope she makes it, right? I wish I could help her. That's nice. But do they also say like, wait a minute, I didn't know not everybody in the world doesn't get to go to school. You mean girls don't get to go to school some places? Well, that's terrible. Why is that? I bet I could do something about that. If I should work harder in order to try to do something about that. Maybe I could, right? When they start really taking it back to themselves and think about, well, but education is actually a human right. That's how you get access to choose your own life future. So that's not fair, right? When they start making these bigger ideas out of the thing, which we never said, all we said was, here's a girl got shot in the head for trying to go to school, right? When they do that, no matter their IQ, that deep emotional engagement with this kind of, transcendent story making is actually predicting their brain growth over time.
It's
and
amazing.
Brain
And
growth predicts outcomes.
Okay, so it predicts brain growth.
It predicts
And
outcomes.
is it growth or connectivity? Is it
Both.
like actual size? It's both. Okay.
Both. So it's two kinds of growth: gray matter, like the stuff around the outside, and the white matter, the fiber tracks that are going through the middle. It's like the whole thing. It's so
That's
robust.
awesome.
It's crazy. Yeah.
And then what was the prompt you would give them after they watched the video?
How does this person's story make you feel?
That's it.
That's it.
And if a kid writes, did they write or speak?
No, they spoke on video. We were doing a video interview.
And if they said like at what age group was this?
14, 15, 16.
And they go, it's really sad.
They could do
And
that.
that's it. And that's it. Then you would lump that into like
very concrete meaning making.
Very concrete.
It's concrete. And doing that was actually associated with getting along well in your life around you, saying, but I got to tell you though, kids really got into this because we sat with them. I sat with them for 2 hours and shared them a whole series of really compelling, all of them true stories from kids around the world. And I'm like, well, here's a kid in this place called Pakistan. You know where that is? Okay. So there's this group called the Taliban. Have you heard of them? All right. Well, right. And they don't believe in girls going to school. So here's what happened. Blah, blah, blah. Now let's watch her explain how she thinks about it. Video of her when she's 12, right? How does her story make you feel? Right. The first one or two, they're like, sad. And then they start really getting going. I mean, there's not a kid who did not talk at least some of the time in these big transcendent ways. It's a very, very moving interview. It's meant to be very, very engaging because it's true. All of the stuff in there is true. It's hard to dismiss it.
This is in my mind, leveraging two first principles that are groundbreaking. One is your longitudinal, that is really important to be able to measure from this to that. But then you're looking at how structures and how emotional making narratives are informing structure, and then which is like, I love what you're doing, and that's why I wanted to highlight the research. And
Thanks.
So, so how can folks, if
contribute to that, support that? So please. I mean, the more, none of the money goes to me, right? The more the money we bring in, the more I can hire young scientists, train them, engage, bring people to do the scanning. You know what I mean? It takes resources to do all of that. You can go to candle.usc.edu. Right. So that's the Center for Affective Neuroscience, Development, Learning, and Education, candle.usc.edu. And there's a button you can click where you can contact us. You can donate directly, or you can contact us to discuss, a bigger gift where we can structure it, with the university in a way that will suit you.
That's very clever. If you want to put your name on a building we can make that happen.
We can, yes. Or
That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
you could put your name on a building, or you could put your name on an experiment or two, on a program that we run for teenagers and elderly people to get to know each other and help them build stories and then watch how their brains grow. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities to fund stuff that is really cool.
I'm so happy to introduce you to our community.
Thanks.
Your fire, your intelligence, your ability to cross-pollinate complicated ideas and bring something meaningful to hopefully the now and next generation of learners. So thank you, Mary-Helen, for contributing in your body of work in the way you've done before we met, but then the way that you've illuminated that research and those insights here.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be part of your community and to be able to contribute something. I'm glad it's useful.
Let's do more. Okay, all the best.
Thanks. You too.